Thank you guys so much for joining us today for another episode of Beyond the Device. My name is Reid. We're here with a wonderful organization from identity automation and also from one of our own as well. We're going to do a quick round of introductions, go around the horn. Mr. Tim Till, why don't we start with you, head over to Carter at Dunbar, and then over to Greg Waddell, and we'll kick it off with the first round of questions. We got a quick one for you. But first, Tim, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Tim Till, Director of Sales for Identity Automation. Been with the organization about a dozen or so years, and my focus is on helping education organizations, namely K-12 and higher ed, take advantage of identity and access management initiatives.
Awesome, thank you. And Carter, you, sir.
Yeah, Carter Dunbar. I'm the implementation strategy manager for Identity Automation. I've worked with the company for 6 years, for the company for 2. My role is essentially trying to figure out what the best path to implementation is of our product within higher ed institutions.
Awesome. And then Mr. Waddell, how are you, sir, today? Welcome and thank you for joining us.
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me, Reid. Nice to be with you, Carter and Tim. My name is Greg Waddell. I am the partner manager at 3i. I manage our marketing department, and then I also work with our wonderful vendor community, vendors such as Identity Automation. Very excited to talk to you guys about higher ed today.
All right, let's get right to it. Hyatt doesn't play around, and neither do we today. Building in agility to the identity access management platforms and programs. That's where we're starting out today. We'll just jump right into it. Tim, do you want to start with that? Carter, do you want to start with that programmatic versus point in time, and then getting into the university system for distributed IAM?
Yeah, no, it's a big topic, so we'll kind of break it into pieces here, and we'll talk a little bit about current state, how those things are approached in higher education today and traditionally, and then we'll talk about what should that look like and how can we plan for that going forward. So to kind of tee that up, Carter, you want to talk a little bit about, like, when we talk point in time project versus program, right? I mean, that sounds like a big topic. It sounds or kind of like an abstracted thing. Can you maybe talk through like a real world application of approaching something from a program instead of a project?
Sure. So taking technology out of the equation. Over the summer, I spent an entire weekend where I put in probably 20 hours into my backyard doing all this landscaping, all this building, all of this really cool outdoor living stuff that I was like, this is what it's going to be. I planted flowers, put plants, did all of that, put it in, walked away, felt really good about myself. Didn't touch it again for 2 weeks, came back, it was all dead. The grass had grown, weeds were coming in, and I was like, So this notion of, I put forth a very large effort in the project to get it where I wanted it to be, but it's not just set it and forget it. There is maintenance that's required. There is other things, other priorities that are encroaching upon that space that I have to account for, manage, and curate. And just as the needs were changing for my family, I have to be able to update the space as those needs change. So from a higher ed standpoint, from an identity standpoint, where identity and access management implementations fail is when they are focused on as an IT project and not as a business-wide program. So if an organization comes in and they put all of this effort into deploying a solution that meets their needs at that point in time, and then they set it, they walk away and spend no time to it, it becomes stale. And a year, 2 years later, the thought is, this tool doesn't work. Well, the tool works. You didn't make the tool work for what you needed it to. And that's why we really focus more on the business aspect of a programmatic approach as opposed to a project.
Yeah. I think oftentimes, what'll happen is, organizational say, oh, well, we have all these complex workflows and processes. I guess we should do some identity management. And they look at this in terms of managing access to infrastructure. They look at this in terms of access, security, governance, and policies. And oftentimes these are made in silos. These are made with maybe potentially some steering groups, but everyone rushes to the technical, right? How are we going to connect to these systems, and how are we going to set up these policies? When really the long-term vision approach is you start with the business, and then you move to the functional, and then you arrive at the technical, and the technical is executing against those things in a way that's repeatable and supportable. but building up the business requirements first. So, the first thing to do, I feel, if you really want to build in some agility into your identity and access management strategies, is to start an identity and access governance board within your organization, right? So you have stakeholders across HR, around student registration. It's all about driving value across all aspects of the education system. So, how students, their first interaction with the university or the university system or the college typically is going to be through online resources, right? So what is that experience like, and how can we drive their attention? How can we partner with registration to help on attracting students and giving them a fast, simple, frictionless experience so they can get access to things quickly? So we got a proof point value there. And then you look at things like HR and their ability to do 0-day start on their hires to make sure the right people are getting access to the right things, and there's not these complex, well, I gotta open up a help desk ticket for this person because they're going to need access to different things, and I got to push that over to IT. So partnering with HR to get those success criteria, and then revisiting with infrastructure and HR and your registration office, moving this together in a programmatic way, monthly, quarterly at a minimum, but really there should be what's changed, what are the new needs. And as you look at something like, say, the pandemic that has arisen, I mean, everyone's caught flat-footed there. No, I can't think of anybody who had a plan in place, right? What happens when the world shuts down, no one can come to school, and this goes on forever, right? I don't think anyone had that on their list of strategic plans.
Not on anyone's radar. No.
Yeah, I know, right? So, I mean, you can't, I get it, we all kind of react and we move quickly to close gaps. But so, bringing those teams together, regularly reviewing, and putting in change, a focus on what needs to change in your policy and your approach. I think probably, though, what a lot of organizations will find, that's where the technical becomes the bigger challenge, right? Because now if you're focused on the business and functional, well, you went forward with all this with a technical outcome that maybe was custom development, right? Maybe you brought in a bunch of students as interns and you threw them at it and made them develop something for you. Maybe you went to a consulting firm. Maybe you have some talented people on staff and they hard-coded your technical outcome using their skill sets. Or you bought a legacy system, or even a cloud service system. And I think what you find is rigidity, right? So the solution now, the technical becomes the barrier. So how do you readdress that? So if I create sweeping changes to policy, if I have to now bake in and account for the fact that I've got 25,000 students logging in every day to digital resources that I'm gating them through, do we build in capacity for that? Do we have the oversight and security on that external authentication coming from people whose devices you don't own or manage? What kind of risk exposure is that? And then, so that's where rapid identity and identity automation, that's really where we've made our inroads in education, is having that ability to be flexible to evolving needs. Won't bore you in the how, but I can just tell you that if you talk to our customers, I mean, that's a major reason why they move forward with this. You want the extendability and scalability of a cloud service, but you want the flexibility of knowing that right now you have no idea what you're going to need tomorrow, right? And if you lock yourself into a traditional commercial off-the-shelf platform or custom development, you're not getting out of whatever you built. You can have all the governance programs in the world, executing on those dynamic changes. It's costly, painful, and disruptive.
Yeah.
Well, and higher ed specifically to their credit, were traditionally bleeding edge, and they were ahead of the curve. And they also institutionally have a high technical capacity on staff. And when the need for identity and access management first really became widespread and acknowledged, higher ed would build their own solution, which is awesome because you're not having to buy someone else's. The problem is what we run into all the time is it's a fully custom solution that is scripted out by Bob. And Bob has been in IT for 20 years and Bob is a genius. Well, because Bob built it, he knows how it works, he knows what it does. Why would he write that down? Bob gets hit by a bus, or I literally was talking to a prospect yesterday who said Bob is now retiring. Bob is gone in 6 months.
That's a problem because Bob did everything and now Bob's leaving.
They were like, we need this in place in 6 months or else we have nothing. And so one of the big value propositions and drivers that we've been seeing is just the ability to support and the ability to have documentation to understand what it is doing, and then the flexibility to be able to manipulate it as things change.
Yeah, and I think poor Bob.
Typical Bob.
Poor Bob.
So selfish. I'm kidding. Bob, we wish you well, Bob. Congratulations on your retirement.
I hope you win the lottery and not get hit by the bus, right? I mean,
let's go that route, not the bus route.
So, I mean, but the other thing too is higher ed is unique. You talk to people all the time and they go, oh, we're very unique. We have all these like special things that no one in the world does. And our organization is this, very, very, it's a snowflake, a unicorn. Everyone feels that way. And I think, obviously it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of what you do is probably very specific to your organization, but 80% of it, everybody does, right? With little to no variance. But, and higher ed does have unique challenges as an industry, right? That does make it stand apart from anywhere else. So I'll give you just a couple of quick examples of how these are the kinds of things that need to be incorporated into a long-term strategic vision around identity and access management, especially if we want to build an agility. Number one is I am a student. I'm actively enrolled taking classes. And I also am working there over the summer as a front office clerk or librarian clerk, right? I have some occupational function and a student function, or I'm a professor and I'm also a continuing education student, and I'm also an alumni, right? And so that model is called affiliation management. And so a lot of organizations that, don't strategic plan around these things often are going to have to build in, if John is taking a course there in continuing education and a professor, then he's going to have his John account as a professor, and he's going to have a totally separate account as John as a student. And there's typically little to no correlation from a log perspective, from an audit perspective, that's the same person, right? So, and plus there's friction on the end user experience. You think in a normal organization, you probably have multiple credentials to manage if you're just one identity. But if you're three identities, right, you're taking all that library of credentials and you're expanding it by three, multiplying it by three, and increasing your risk by three, as well as your service level impacts by three. So, I mean, that I think is a problem that's pronounced in higher ed more than any other vertical. And then I would also say in higher ed, they are constantly interfacing with other organizations like themselves. So, in a research university capacity or collaborating with federal resources, you have a large number of external identities. And then we're not just talking in common, right, which is an approach to that, but just in general, I could have a medical practice at my university and I could have visiting physicians coming in. So there is a constant influx of identities that have no business process that governs when they come or when they go or what they're doing while they're there and who brought them in and why, right? So that exposes organizations to a significant risk in that, hey, I have, Bob starting as a contractor and he's going to be here for a few months. They request that account. Bob leaves after a week. No one calls IT to say, oh, that guy, yeah, no, he's gone. Can you do the due diligence of removing that access? So Carter, I mean, you've worked with customers on a number of these implementations. So what do you hear when they start out with these projects, right? What's the expectation that they built up for themselves on what the outcomes are going to be, and how has maybe poor planning or poor business practice impacted or hurt that vision, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the fundamental understanding of what this problem is, and it's a business problem. It's not an IT problem. And so if you were trying to put a solution out there, if you put the IT part at the forefront, you are asking your technical people within the higher ed institution to craft processes and solutions that impact instruction and administration and things that they have an idea about but don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so from a requirements gathering standpoint, requirements gathering is so much more important than higher education than it is in, say, K-12 education, mainly because it has to be across the entire organization. All of the business leaders have to come together to understand their processes, their data, and what needs to happen, as opposed to just letting IT mandate their will, because that will kill adoption. It will frustrate your students. It will frustrate your professors. And ultimately, a lot of these institutions, one of their main revenue streams is enrollment. If the user experience for students is poor, they're not going to want to go to your university. That takes away revenue.
That's a big, it's big revenue. Have you come across that and seen that in the? Sorry, my microphone's like just dancing by itself. Have you seen that as an actual problem within higher ed, where the enrollment was down significantly because it was just a nuisance to actually do everything online?
Yeah, I would say we would see that in places where you have lifelong students. So I wouldn't say maybe like on the front end, but a lifelong learner, especially like say community college. Full disclosure, I was in the 8-year path for my 2-year degree through community college, working 4 jobs. Right? I mean, that was my life. And community colleges tend to track those students over a very long period of time because they are typically working professionals weaving in and out of the education system. And then the second that becomes painful, they could be like, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to take more courses this semester. And if they have a bad experience, that's all the excuse somebody who isn't in it to win it needs to not pull the trigger, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd say if you're in a lifetime learner or long-time learner model, you're going to feel that impact more.
Also, too, I think this goes back to economic equity, or excuse me, economic, but also academic equity. In making something available for everybody, and where it shouldn't be super complicated for one person and not for another. Yeah. And to keep that door of education a revolving door, and so it doesn't close, and so people can continue to learn and make advancements for themselves. I'm curious, is this happened just because of the world of COVID-19 and how crazy everything is? Did you see that, like, online universities like Arizona? What's
University of Phoenix?
Thank you. Yeah, University of Phoenix. I knew it had something to do with Arizona, kind of. I think it's actually the bird, not the state, but whatever. I like organizations like that were already poised to take advantage of the online accessibility. Did they not get the jolt as hard, or were even those organizations that were already pursuing identity access management and the online pursuit of education, were those organizations not encumbered by what happened with COVID-19?
No, so there is a key line of delineation that we need to make. There is when you're talking about online universities as opposed to for-profit universities and nonprofit accredited universities, because there is a distinction for that. Okay. A lot of the for-profit universities have run into a lot of issues that have kept them from having that jolt specifically. So if you're talking about campuses, be it whatever university system they are associated with, that were focused primarily on an online method of delivery of their education, yes, those absolutely got a jolt. My brother-in-law actually is the campus director for a satellite campus of a state university here in Texas, and they were majority online before COVID. And so with COVID striking and people having to revert to a non-in-person digital experience, they tended to gravitate more towards the organizations that were already doing that and delivering it. And so his enrollment actually, I believe, doubled during COVID.
Wow.
Which is
so, all right. So
massive.
a point of clarity. When I was saying jolt, I was meaning it in a pejorative connotation. Like you get shocked because you're like, I wasn't preparing for this. And as a result, it's bad. And you're saying jolt in a positive way, like you're getting a jolt of business, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just for point for people listening or for those watching, sorry for not using better language on my
We just try to reverse it, right?
on my part. But see, you took something that was negative and you made it very positive, which is again why people should be working with identity automation.
That's what we try to do.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you actually, so those online universities that were already there actually probably not probably, you said it's actually seen an increase of enrollment because they had already had the infrastructure in play to take advantage of people being remote.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So I think, and again, and this, Tim, what you were saying about having an active plan and not planning for things in the future or getting caught off guard. I think this is also not to be like a thumb in the eye, like, you should have done this. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it's like there is for sure a reason to look at where things are going from a technology perspective and accessibility, and doing what you can to pivot to that ahead of time. So that way, I mean, obviously, COVID is a completely an unrealistic world that we're unfortunately really living in. But even past that, you look at Blockbuster, what happened with Netflix. And it was like, oh no, like people love coming here. They like the experience of coming into the store. And, we also saw what happened with Blockbuster. So there is a thing about having that online access. It goes well past just entertainment, but even into the education realm.
Yeah, and if you wanted to really, that's a great insight, Reid. And if you really want to take a dark turn, you
sure.
could.
It's a Friday. It's a Friday.
Yeah, why not,
Let's do it.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is disruptive enough. There are so many markets being disrupted. There's so much permanent wealth destruction occurring right now across the country, and that's a terrible thing to say. But it's a more terrible thing to realize that it's a true statement. That there are aspects of our culture and our way of life that will never come back to the way it was. And so, if you wanted to take a potentially dark turn, you could say higher ed is looking at that as potential, right? That if this continues on further, it creates challenges around the value case and really puts them in an existential crisis, so to speak. It has a potential to. And to your point, Blockbuster. So what happened when digital resources, streaming, online retail came out, and the need to physically go to these places diminished? What did you see? You saw mergers, you saw acquisitions, you saw consolidations. It's not unreasonable to see that you could see some hired organizations going through the same trials and tribulations to navigate an uncertain future, right? Could completely, permanently change the student relationship to the organization. I mean, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but it could happen. And if things continue, it becomes increasingly more likely, right?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily being an alarmist. I think, especially when you're looking at something like COVID and the market implications, I think it's an uncomfortable thing to speak about. And obviously, especially in the business world, we try to maintain a positive outlook and a positive, a feel of what we're trying to accomplish. But this is an unprecedented time, and people are going to your point, probably going to have to pivot in a different business model. And just like those mergers and acquisitions that we did see in those types of places, it might be a thing where university systems end up doing the same in order to compete, in order to ultimately stay alive. I hate to use the word alive because it's kind of depressing, but I think there is something to be said about looking at that. And I think that the organizations that have gotten ahead of things technologically at the basis of levels, which are the people going to your universities or your schools. I mean, that's the entry point, right? So, I mean, if for those organizations that have that figured out are probably going to be poised in a much better position moving forward, which is what you saw with COVID, where everybody was forced into online learning. The online places didn't really feel the impact. In fact, they benefited from it, weirdly enough.
Well, you made a great point there, right? So what you pointed to was the people, right? The things that are, entering the organization and consuming the services. From our perspective, I mean, that's an identity, right? So the one constant in all this, whether you are physically at a university or you're consuming your education asynchronously at home or local coffee bar, if you're not locked down completely, the one constant there is management of that identity. So as we talk about how does this all apply to identity management, right? I thought this was going to be a really geeky identity management podcast when we talk about, let's focus on the business impacts first, right? And recognize identity management is a path we can walk together to navigate, manage, and execute against some of these business challenges. The identity is the constant that's not going to change. However, we need to elevate it because we need to recognize that if we are going to be delivering more content for academic continuity to remote learners, then that experience should be as frictionless and as secure and as enriched as we can get it. And as a academic organization, we need to pull as much analytics from that as we possibly can to help create better educational outcomes for our students. Right. So if imagine in a world where imagine in the world where you are.
Shout out to Pat LaFontaine, right? There you go.
Well, there's a world. Man, yes, exactly. So you're logged into an access portal, right? I am presented all these different resources. My professor has visibility over what resources I have access to. Did I log into it? When did I log into it, right? And we can anonymize this to give you real analytic, deep data points that you can evaluate at a business level so that you can drive changes. You can see, are your remote learning students engaged? Are they doing the kinds of things that you expect them to be doing? Your staff, right? They're all working remote too. Are they actually logging in? Maybe people don't want to go the big brother approach, but if everything is on the line and being driven, you have visibility. And even with anonymized data, you can at least see trends, right? And that gives you an advantage. So you can tie the identity back to this as a central foundation point to build, make it the heart of the strategy, and focus on securing, enriching, and enabling that identity's access to resources to better position you to changing events down the road. So again, just want to emphasize, for today, I'll give you the sales pitch, right? Normally don't do these kinds of things, but recognize that let's say you're a university system and you're building requirements. You could spend the next 18 months building requirements, and at some point in that requirements build, enough's going to change that your starting process is over. So you need to move and build at the same time. And you can't do that with anything other than rapid identity by identity automation. You can be building, it can evolve, it can inform the process, and it can change with the changing process without custom development, right? And that's really where higher education needs to be, is nimble and agile processes, but in how they safeguard and execute those processes. So I'll sort of put a period there, as that's the sales pitch, and we're happy to talk to you guys through 3i to kind of help you stages. We can move into consulting to kind of help you. We can talk product. We can talk practices, and we're connected to over 100 universities and colleges on rapid identity today. So we're happy to introduce you to other universities that went through these processes and what they were able to achieve. So we look forward to talking to you.
So before we put a bow on this, Carter had an acronym that he dropped before we hit record on this that I wanted to make sure we call out. MOOCs.
You just like the term MOOCs.
I gotta put you on the spot for that, Carter. Explain what MOOCs are, why they're important right now, and where we go from there.
Sure. So MOOCs are massive open online courses. The discipline that is colloquially known as is Ed on Demand. And it is a platform of open courses where universities can affiliate and align themselves with this platform to be able to deliver asynchronous digital learning that's actually accredited and leads to a degree. So it handles things like micro masters, micro bachelors, actual masters, certifications, things of that nature. But so
Fortnite.
it goes Fortnite.
No, not Fortnite.
Not
Okay.
Fortnite.
Maybe. I was gonna say, if that's the case, I know a lot of people that have degrees. I'm
But
not
yeah,
one of them. I haven't played it, but I've heard the game's amazing.
it is an interesting platform that your traditional universities are beginning to pivot towards, to be able to target your non-traditional students. So your students who aren't 18 to 22, who are fully focused on being students, or 22 to 24, 26, fully focused on being a master's. It's, I've gone out into the world, I've gotten a real job, and now I'm trying on my own time to further my education. It's a different delivery mechanism, but it's something that, to Tim's point, is causing some disruption and some pivot within the traditional university system.
So you guys have listed like just a ton of almost necessary changes for large universities today that are used to doing things traditionally in person. We talked about universities that maybe already had shifted, are well positioned right now. What do the universities that aren't well positioned, that hadn't shifted, do from here? And do you have a sense of where we're at? I got to imagine we're still in the very beginning of this avalanche of changes that need to happen in this world, right?
Yeah, I think we're in the anger mode, right? Isn't that the stages, right? You go to start with denial. I think denial ended middle of the summer. I think we're now in the angry mode. We always want to be careful with these topics because I do think there's a level of frustration at the moment, right? But then we got to move into acceptance. So that's coming next. So some universities are probably now in the beginning stages of shifting, re-architecting, redefining, and that could be as simple as vision and mission, and that could be as down the road as content delivery. So it could be fundamental and transformational, or it could be tweaking. But I think everyone's in planning mode, and I think everyone has moved away from the denial phase. I think denial was very high in the higher ed space. K-12 couldn't deny, right? They had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think higher ed was very much a stayed in denial longer than most other verticals. But I think now we're in the let's do the long-term pivots. Let's do the things we need to do to be in a better position. There's going to be, I think, we're in the period of strategy making right now for everybody. So it's a great time to talk.
So we've gotten through anger, bargaining, and depression. We're now at acceptance, for the record.
Yeah, we're hoping so. Yeah.
We're hoping so. We're not stuck. It might be bargaining, but we're really hoping we're at the acceptance.
My senior degree was not in psychology, so.
I got a degree in Google everything, so I had to look it up on it. My face was probably glowing at one point from all the white light on my screen because I can't hide it that I didn't know what that was. I just knew denial was in there, and I think acceptance was in there too, and that's as far as my brain remembered.
The Simpsons episode. That's what I.
Well, look, I mean, there's a lot that we can help with, and to bring it back to a point that's serious. Sometimes these things can feel very overwhelming, and make you feel like you're stuck, or make you feel like you're, alone and trying to solve an impossible problem. And that is not the case. It's ultimately why we're here. It's why we have partnerships with organizations like Identity Automation that make amazing products that can help solve a lot of your problems, even more so than you realize, even in the EDU space. Before we wrap it up, closing comments. Greg, we'll start with you. I'll put you on the spot because why not? It's Friday. And then Carter, and then Tim, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I don't think I have a ton to add. I enjoyed this conversation. Everybody at Identity Automation has definitely been a problem solver in my book since I started working with you guys last year. So I think we've got avenues forward. You've got the right people to talk to on this conversation right here, and reach out and let us know how we can help.
Yeah, and I would say if I could sum up what Identity Automation's focus is, particularly as it pertains to education, is we're trying to use technology as a tool. It's not a panacea, it's not a cure, but it is a tool to help facilitate learning outcomes, to keep universities safe and secure, and to try to mitigate and eliminate the educational equity gap. So that is really the drivers behind what we're doing and what we're developing. And we got some cool stuff coming down the line that we're really excited to get back in touch with you guys and talk about.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll just end it by saying that, apart from what we can do, I would definitely start the journey with 3i. I mean, they have access to a number of fantastic vendors that have similar missions to identity automation that are all about adding value for their customers. Very passionate about what they do. And, 3i is a great source of information. I mean, these guys are extremely excited. They're extremely driven, and they're a great partner for us. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today.
Well, thank you guys for making yourself available. That brings us to the end of this episode of Beyond the Device with Identity Automation, talking about Hi-Ed. Appreciate you guys listening or watching, whatever medium you've decided to do so in. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us at sales@3itech.com. That's sales at the number 3, EYETECH.com. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you next time. We'll see you on the internet.